Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
3 True Winter Horror Stories. Hey everyone, it's Mr. Nightmare here. Winter. For most people, it means cozy nights by the fire, hot chocolate, and holiday cheer. But for others, winter means something else entirely. The cold, the darkness that comes so early, the isolation when you're snowed in with no way out. Winter can be beautiful, sure, but it can also be absolutely terrifying. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories that happened during the winter months. Stories about people who experienced things that still haunt them to this day. Stories that might make you think twice before venturing out into the cold, or staying inside alone. So, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The Cabin in the Woods. This story comes from a guy named Derek, who was 24 at the time this happened. It was January of 2019, and Derek had just gone through a pretty rough breakup. He needed to get away, clear his head, so he decided to rent a cabin up in northern Maine for a week. Complete isolation, no neighbors for miles, just him, the woods, and the snow. The cabin was old, but well-maintained. It had that rustic charm you'd expect: wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom upstairs in the loft. The nearest town was about 40 minutes away by car, and the dirt road leading to the cabin was barely plowed. Derek had to drive slowly, carefully, his tires crunching through 6 inches of fresh snow. When he arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun was already setting, that winter sun that disappears by 4:30, leaving everything in this eerie blue twilight. Derek unloaded his bags, got a fire going in the fireplace, and tried to relax. He made himself dinner, drank a beer, and sat by the fire scrolling through his phone. But the cell service out there was terrible, barely 1 bar. He figured that was fine. He was here to disconnect anyway. That first night was quiet. Too quiet. Derek had lived in the city his whole life, so he was used to constant noise: cars, sirens, people. But out here, the silence was almost oppressive. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. He went to bed around 11, climbed up into the loft, and pulled the thick comforter over himself. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A sound from outside. Footsteps, crunching through the snow. Derek's eyes snapped open. He lay there perfectly still, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They seemed to be circling the cabin. He told himself it was probably just an animal, a deer maybe. But the footsteps sounded heavy, too heavy to be a deer. He got out of bed and crept to the window. The moon was full that night, casting a pale glow over the snow-covered clearing around the cabin. Derek peered out, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No movement. The footsteps had stopped. He waited there for a few minutes, his breath fogging up the cold glass. Finally, he convinced himself he'd imagined it. Cabin fever on the first night? He laughed nervously and went back to bed. But the next morning, Derek saw something that made his blood run cold. Footprints. In the snow, all around the cabin, human footprints. They circled the entire structure, coming right up to the windows in some places, as if someone had been looking inside. Derek felt his stomach drop. He stepped outside in his boots and jacket, following the trail. The prints led into the woods and disappeared. Who the hell would be out here? And why would they be creeping around his cabin in the middle of the night? Derek spent the day trying to shake off the unease. He told himself it was probably just a local, maybe someone checking on the property. But that didn't make sense. The cabin was rented out. They'd know someone was here. That evening, as darkness fell again, Derek made sure all the doors were locked. He kept the fire going, the lights on. He even dragged a chair in front of the door just to be safe. He tried to watch a movie on his laptop, but he couldn't focus. Every little sound made him jump. Around midnight, he heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they were different, faster, more urgent. They weren't just circling the cabin now, they were coming closer. Derek grabbed his phone, ready to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. He moved to the window, staying low, and peeked out. And that's when he saw him. A man. Standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet from the cabin. He was just standing there, perfectly still. Dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by the shadows. The moonlight reflected off the snow, making everything seem surreal, dreamlike. But this was real. This was happening. Derek's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He watched the man, waiting for him to move, to do something. But the man just stood there, staring at the cabin, staring at Derek. And then, slowly, the man raised his hand and waved. Derek stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair. What actual He grabbed the fireplace poker, the only weapon he had, and held it tightly. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't leave. His car was outside, and there was no way he was going out there. He waited, weapon in hand, listening. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The footsteps didn't come back. Eventually, he forced himself to look out the window again. The man was gone. Derek never slept that night. He sat by the fire, the poker across his lap, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, he packed his things as fast as he could and got the hell out of there. He didn't care about losing the rental deposit. He just needed to leave. As he drove down the snowy road, he glanced in his rearview mirror. And there, in the woods, near the cabin, was the man, watching him go. Derek never went back. He never found out who the man was or what he wanted. But to this day, he can't shake the image of that figure standing in the snow, waving at him in the middle of the night.
Story 2. The Frozen Lake. This next story comes from a woman named Sarah. She was 17 when this happened, during the winter of 2016. Sarah lived in a small town in Minnesota, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and there's not much to do. So when her friends suggested they go skating on the old frozen lake outside of town, she figured, why not? The lake was called Blackwater Lake, and it had this reputation. There were stories about it, old legends that parents told their kids to keep them away. They said the lake was cursed, that people had drowned there over the years and their spirits never left. Typical small-town ghost stories. Sarah didn't believe in any of it. It was a Saturday night, and Sarah went with 3 friends, Matt, her boyfriend at the time, and 2 other girls, Jess and Emily. They drove out to the lake around 8 p.m. It was freezing, probably around 10 degrees, and the wind made it feel even colder. The lake was completely frozen over, a smooth sheet of ice that stretched out into the darkness. They parked near the shore and laced up their skates. Matt had brought a battery-powered lantern, which cast this dim, yellowish glow over the ice. They skated around, laughing, pushing each other, having fun. For a while, it was great, just friends enjoying a winter night. But then Emily said something that changed the mood. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" They all stopped skating, listened. At first, Sarah didn't hear anything, just the wind whistling across the ice. But then, there it was, a sound, faint, distant. It sounded like crying. A woman crying. "It's probably just the wind," Matt said, but his voice wavered. He wasn't sure. They stood there, grouped together, the lantern casting long shadows on the ice. The crying sound continued. It seemed to be coming from the far end of the lake, out where the darkness swallowed everything. "We should go," Jess said. "This is creepy." But Matt, trying to be brave, shook his head. "Come on, it's nothing. Let's just keep skating." They tried to ignore it, but the sound kept getting louder, closer. And then they saw something that made them all freeze. A figure, out on the ice. Far in the distance, just at the edge of the lantern's light. It looked like a woman standing perfectly still. She was wearing a white dress, which made no sense. It was 10 degrees outside. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her face. "Who the hell is that?" Sarah whispered. No one answered. They just stared. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, facing them. "Maybe she needs help," Emily suggested, but her voice was shaky. She didn't believe her own words. Matt took a step forward, holding up the lantern. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The woman remained still. And then she started moving, not walking, gliding across the ice, toward them. "Okay, we're leaving, now." Jess turned and started skating back toward the shore. The others followed, their hearts pounding. Sarah glanced back over her shoulder and saw the woman gliding faster now, closing the distance. Her white dress flowed behind her like she was underwater. They reached the shore and scrambled to take off their skates, fingers fumbling with the laces. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely untie them. She kept looking back, expecting to see the woman right behind her. But when she looked, the woman had stopped. She was standing at the edge of the ice, just where the shore began. Her face was still obscured by her hair, but she could feel her staring at them. They threw their skates in the car and jumped in. Matt started the engine, and they peeled out of there, tires spinning on the icy ground. No one spoke for a few minutes. They were all trying to process what they'd just seen. "What the fuck was that?" Jess finally said. "I don't know," Matt replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah pulled out her phone and Googled Blackwater Lake deaths. What she found made her feel sick. Several articles came up. Over the years, multiple people had drowned in Blackwater Lake, but one story stood out. In 1987, a woman named Catherine Mills went missing during the winter. Her car was found near the lake, but she was never found. Search teams looked for weeks, but the ice was too thick, the water too deep. The following spring, when the ice melted, they found her body. She had drowned. She was wearing a white dress. Sarah showed the article to her friends. They all went silent. "That's who we saw," Emily whispered. "That was her." They never went back to Blackwater Lake. And a few weeks later, Sarah heard from a friend of a friend that another group of teenagers had gone skating there. They had seen the woman too. One of them even tried to approach her, get closer. But when he did, the ice beneath him cracked. He fell through. They pulled him out, but he was hypothermic, barely conscious. When he recovered, he said the woman had been standing right next to the hole in the ice, looking down at him, smiling. Story 3. The Snowstorm. This final story comes from a man named Tom, and it's probably the most disturbing of the three. Tom was 31 when this happened, back in February of 2020. He was a delivery driver for a courier company, and his route took him through some pretty rural areas in upstate New York. It was a Friday evening, and Tom was finishing up his last delivery of the day. The weather had been bad all week. Constant snow, icy roads, freezing temperatures. The forecast was calling for a massive snowstorm that night, one of the worst of the season. Tom wanted to finish his route and get home before it hit. His last delivery was to a house way out in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those addresses that barely showed up on GPS. He drove down a winding road through the woods, his headlights cutting through the falling snow. By the time he found the house, it was almost dark. The house was old, really old. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Faded paint, crooked shutters, a sagging porch. But there were lights on inside, so someone was definitely home. Tom grabbed the package and walked up to the front door, his boots crunching through the snow. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. He could hear a TV inside, the muffled sound of voices. Maybe they just didn't hear him. Tom tried the doorbell, but it didn't seem to work. He sighed, his breath fogging in the cold air, and knocked one more time. Finally, the door opened. An old woman stood there, probably in her 70s. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a ratty old sweater. But it was her eyes that unsettled Tom. They were off, not quite looking at him, like she was staring through him. "Delivery for Henderson?" Tom said, holding out the package. The woman didn't say anything. She just stared at him. Then slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too eager. "Come in," she said. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't spoken in a while. "Oh, no thanks. I just need you to sign for this." "Come in," she repeated, more insistent this time. "It's cold out there. You'll freeze." Tom felt a chill run down his spine, and it wasn't from the weather. Something about this woman was wrong. "I really need to get going," he said. "The storm's coming." The woman's smile faded. Her expression darkened. "You should come inside," she said again, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "before they see you." Tom's instincts were screaming at him to leave. "Who?" he asked, even though he didn't want to know. The woman glanced past him, out toward the woods. "The ones who live in the trees. They come out when it snows. They're always watching." Okay, this lady was clearly not all there. Tom decided to just leave the package on the porch and go. "I'm just going to set this here, ma'am. You have a good night." He turned to leave, but the woman grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Don't go out there," she hissed. "They'll follow you. They always follow." Tom pulled his arm free and hurried back to his truck, his heart racing. He glanced back and saw the woman still standing in the doorway, watching him. That creepy smile was back on her face. He got in his truck, started the engine, and pulled away as fast as the icy road would allow. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "The ones who live in the trees. They're always watching." Tom tried to focus on the road, but the snow was coming down harder now. Visibility was terrible. His windshield wipers could barely keep up. And then, about 5 minutes down the road, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Figures, standing among the trees. At first he thought it was just his imagination, the shadows playing tricks on him in the snowstorm. But no, there were people, or things that looked like people, standing perfectly still among the trees on both sides of the road. Tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs. They didn't move. They just watched as he drove past. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He told himself it was the storm, the poor visibility, his mind playing tricks. But then one of the figures stepped onto the road. It stood there, right in the middle, facing his truck. Tom slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded on the ice, fishtailing before coming to a stop about 20 feet from the figure. Tom's heart was hammering. He stared at the thing in front of him. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes, were just black voids reflecting his headlights. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, it started walking toward the truck. Not a normal walk. It moved in this jerky, disjointed way, like a puppet being pulled by strings. Tom threw the truck in reverse and floored it. The tires spun on the ice before catching, and the truck shot backwards. He cranked the wheel, turned around, and drove in the opposite direction, away from the figure. His mind was racing. What the hell did I just see? He looked in his rearview mirror and saw more of them. They were stepping out of the woods now, onto the road behind him. 5, 6, maybe more. They all stood there watching his truck disappear into the snow. Tom didn't stop driving until he reached the main highway.
When he finally got home that night, 2 hours later than planned, he was shaking. He couldn't explain what he had seen. He tried to convince himself it was the storm, exhaustion, stress. But deep down, he knew what he saw was real. A few days later, Tom looked up the area where he'd made that delivery. He found an article from a local news site. Years ago, that stretch of woods had been the site of a series of disappearances. Hikers, hunters, people who'd ventured into the woods and never came back. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no clues. Just gone. The locals had their own explanation. They said the woods were haunted, that something lived there, something that took people. They called them the Watchers. Tom quit his delivery job 2 weeks later. He couldn't do it anymore. Every time he drove down a dark, snowy road, he'd see them again in his mind. Those tall, thin figures standing among the trees, watching, always watching. He still has nightmares about that night, and sometimes, when it snows, he swears he can see them outside his window, standing in the street, staring up at his house, waiting. And there you have it. 3 true winter horror stories that'll make you think twice before venturing out into the cold or staying in alone. Derek's encounter with the stranger in the woods, Sarah's experience at Blackwater Lake, and Tom's run-in with the Watchers. These are the kinds of stories that stick with you, that make you wonder what else is out there in the darkness. Winter can be beautiful, sure, but it can also hide things that only come out when the snow falls and the nights grow long. Stay safe out there, everyone, and remember, if you're ever alone in the cold and you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Until next time, this is Mr. Nightmare. Sweet dreams.